There are stories that never make it into the textbooks, missions that were never recorded in official military logs, and people whose names never appeared in any report. Chernobyl was not just a nuclear explosion. It was a political earthquake, a masterclass in information control, and a place where human beings stood at the crossroads of morality, duty, and survival. In this video, we'll retrace the erased footprints, from the first blue flash that tore through the night sky, to the convoys transporting nuclear warheads under cover of darkness, and finally, to the silent strands of irradiated meat that found their way into the meals of millions. So fasten your seatbelt as we dive into today's mystery. But first, you just might get incredibly lucky if you like and subscribe before this video ends. Part 1. The Blue Flash, a whisper from a forgotten explosion. In the early hours of April 26, 1986, a thunderous blast tore through the night sky over Pripyat. Reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant had just exploded. That moment is now widely regarded as the beginning of one of the worst industrial disasters of the 20th century. But there was one detail, so small that many overlooked it, that might completely alter the way we understand this catastrophe. A brilliant, almost otherworldly flash of blue light lit up the darkness just before everything collapsed. Witnesses would later call it the Blue Flash, and to this day, its origin remains a mystery without a clear explanation. A local fisherman who had been less than half a mile from the plant at the time recalled seeing not one, but two separate explosions. Between them, he saw a blue glow unlike anything he had ever witnessed, so bright and unnatural that it seemed to suspend the earth in stillness, if only for a second. Other eyewitnesses, including plant workers, also reported seeing the light, hovering in the air like a glowing phantom. Soviet authorities were quick to offer an official explanation. According to them, the disaster was the result of a technical chain reaction, a failed safety test, a steam explosion, and then a hydrogen blast caused by extreme heat rupturing the reactor's core. But the blue flash was never mentioned in any official report. Years later, nuclear physicists began to ask troubling questions. If the explosion had only involved steam and hydrogen gas, why was there such a vivid display of ionized light? A controversial theory began to take shape, suggesting that the first explosion might not have been purely mechanical. It might have been, in fact, a nuclear detonation, small, brief, but powerful enough to launch radioactive particles miles into the air, far beyond the pattern of a typical industrial accident. Lars-Erik de Geer, a researcher in Sweden, discovered traces of xenon-133, a radioactive isotope typically produced in nuclear detonations, detected in Chernobyl, more than 230 miles away from Chernobyl. The troubling part? Chernobyl wasn't located in the path of the known radioactive plume. For xenon-133 to appear there, a blast strong enough to propel particles into the upper atmosphere would have been necessary, high enough for them to drift hundreds of miles via high-altitude wind currents. Viewed from this angle, the blue flash is no longer just a vague anomaly. It becomes evidence, or at the very least a sign, that an uncontrolled fission reaction may have occurred. Not merely an industrial mishap, but an explosion with the fingerprint of a weapon. Unintended, but very real. It's difficult to say for certain what truly happened in those first minutes. But if that flash of blue light was indeed the result of a nuclear detonation, then the truth about Chernobyl runs deeper and darker than we've ever been told. Part 2. Operation Cyclone. The rain that saved the capital and silently drowned the countryside. 2 days after the explosion at reactor number 4, a top-secret map was laid before Yuri Israel, the chairman of the Soviet Union's State Committee for Hydrometeorology. On that map was a massive gray cloud of radioactive particles slowly drifting southeast, straight toward the capital, Moscow. At the time, preserving national image was deemed just as important as protecting public health. And so, Yuri Israel issued an unofficial but deeply consequential order. He wrote just 3 words on the report: "Make it rain." Immediately, 2-6 strategic bombers, aircraft originally designed to carry nuclear warheads, were dispatched from an airbase near Moscow. But this time, they carried no weapons. Instead, their payload bays were filled with artillery shells loaded with silver iodide, a chemical compound known to induce artificial rainfall. The single objective of this mission was to force the radioactive cloud to release its rain before it could ever reach the capital. At 8 p.m. on April 28th, the skies north of Chernobyl suddenly darkened. In the village of Narovlia, about 30 miles from the plant, residents looked up to see strange yellow streaks spreading across the sky. Then, the rain came down. But it was no ordinary rain. It was black, heavy, and clinging. Rain saturated with radiation. Just as intended, the radioactive particles were washed from the atmosphere, but instead of falling over an uninhabited wasteland, they came down on villages, schools, and farmlands. Belarus, not Moscow, bore the silent wrath of the sky. Part 3. When the sky was locked shut. Artificial drought and the haunting of the Pripyat River. While dark clouds rained down over Belarus, flooding the countryside with radioactive water, a completely different order was issued in Ukraine. This time, rain was not allowed to fall at all. The reason lay in the Pripyat River, one of Ukraine's most vital aquatic arteries, connecting a web of lakes and waterways and flowing directly south. If rain were to fall at just the wrong time and place, the radioactive runoff would surge downstream, contaminating the entire lower basin. And so a decision was made, not by generals, but by meteorologists. Civilian aircraft, normally used for routine atmospheric research, were hastily equipped with a strange compound known as Cement 600, a dry mixture of fine cement and desiccant chemicals designed to extract moisture from the air. Their mission was to stop the rain by drying out the clouds before they could burst. Soon, strange aircraft began circling the skies south of Chernobyl, weaving between dense clouds and dispersing tons of the compound into the atmosphere. The campaign to kill the rain didn't last long, but its consequences would linger for months. The artificial drought not only stopped the spread of radioactive water, but also altered the ecosystem of the entire region. Small rivers dried up, algae-choked ponds silently vanished from the map, and with every rainstorm held back, a piece of nature was cut away from its own flow, disconnected and left to disappear. Part 4. The first photographs, and the price of bringing truth to light. There are moments in history that cannot be captured in words. They can only survive through blurry frames, taken in haste, under circumstances no one was prepared for. On the morning of April 26, 1986, when most of the world had yet to hear the name Chernobyl, a veteran photographer named Igor Kostin received an urgent phone call. The voice on the line said only one thing: "Something's happened at the nuclear power plant. Get your camera ready." By early afternoon, he was aboard a helicopter circling the smoldering remains of reactor number 4. Ash-gray dust swirled through the sky on the wind. Kostin had no mask, no protective gear, only a bulky Kiev 6 camera in his hands, and a gut instinct that told him, if he didn't take the shot now, there might be nothing left to capture. But every time he pressed the shutter, a wave of hot air seemed to rise from the ground, flooding the helicopter's cabin and fogging up his lens as though it were wrapped in mist. Back in the darkroom, the truth became clear. The radiation had eaten away nearly the entire roll of film. Nearly 20 photographs were lost forever, burned away by invisible forces. Only one frame survived. And that single image became the very first symbol of the Chernobyl disaster. But Kostin wasn't the only one who turned his lens toward the burning horizon. Another photographer, Anatoly Raskazov, was also dispatched to the site. As the official photographer for the plant, he arrived in Chernobyl around 9 a.m. that same day, carrying 2 cameras, a Zenit and a Kiev 6. When his helicopter circled over the shattered reactor, he recalled, "The ash was so thick in the air I couldn't shoot through the glass. I had to open the window and lean out. A soldier held onto my legs to keep me from falling." The film from his Zenit camera was completely burned by gamma radiation, but fortunately, the remaining roll from his Kiev 6 managed to preserve a few images. He continued taking photographs on the ground, even climbing onto an abandoned fire truck near the reactor, where remnants of the nuclear core were still steaming in the open air. But when he returned and submitted his photos to the plant's director, Viktor Bryukhanov, the images were immediately confiscated by national security agents. Raskazov was ordered into complete silence, told never to speak of what he had seen. as if he had never been there at all. Part 5. The secret nuclear convoy. Deadly silence on the roads of Kyiv. As night fell over the city of Kyiv in the final days of April 1986, the people slipped into sleep as if nothing had happened. But beneath the calm veil of darkness, a military convoy was already in motion. 30 trucks rolled quietly down the roads, each carrying a payload so dangerous that even the drivers themselves didn't fully grasp its magnitude. In the cab of the lead vehicle, Lieutenant Colonel Viktor Shev gripped the steering wheel tightly as the Geiger counter beside him began to tick faster and faster, its sharp, rhythmic clicks sounding like the heartbeat of something dying. Inside the canvas-covered trucks weren't just ordinary anti-air missiles. Hidden among them were 3 live nuclear warheads, weapons not designed for defense, but for erasing a city from the map in under a minute. It had been 3 days since the explosion at reactor number. Amid the chaos, high-ranking Soviet officers realized that an anti-air missile base located less than 20 miles from Chernobyl, once a key node in their defense network, was now heavily coated in radioactive fallout. Stationed at that very site was part of the S-75 Divina system, the same model that had etched its name into Cold War history when it shot down an American U-2 spy plane in 1960. The order was issued: evacuate the warheads immediately. Nothing explosive could be left behind. After nearly 14 hours of slow, tense travel, never exceeding 30 kilometers per hour, the convoy finally reached Borispil Air Base. There, the warheads were carefully unloaded and dismantled by a special team of technicians. 2 bottles of red wine were quietly opened and passed among the officers. The drivers, however, received nothing. Shev and his team weren't given time to rest. 3 more trips back into the radioactive zone awaited them. Each return was a silent descent into death. Years later, Shev would recall that his lead driver, a young man just 28 years old, died not long after the final mission. 3 years on, the trucks used in the operation were still sitting abandoned at the airbase, like ghost ships run aground. No one dared touch them. Part 6. The radioactive meat train, when disaster found its way into dinner. 4 years after the explosion of reactor number 4, another summer settled over the northern plains of Ukraine. Beneath the blue skies and ripening fields, something still smoldered, something that had never truly ended. On the edge of an abandoned rail station in the town of Pisky, 4 refrigerated train cars stood motionless under the sweltering sun. Their doors were sealed shut with rusted chains, and the surrounding ground was so eerily silent that not even birds dared to land. Inside those cars, over 300 tons of radioactive meat was slowly rotting in the heat of July. This story began in 1986, not long after the reactor blew. As the radioactive cloud spread, the Soviet government issued a sweeping order to round up over 50,000 livestock animals from the Chernobyl region. These included herds of cattle that had grazed on fields dusted with cesium-137 and iodine-131, and pigs that had wallowed in mud contaminated by poisoned groundwater. Their meat was sent to processing plants across Ukraine and Belarus. There, workers were forced to mix clean meat with radioactive meat, hoping that if the ratio was diluted enough, the Geiger counters wouldn't notice. They called it dose dilution. At the factories, food safety inspectors were hastily trained in a matter of hours. They walked the floors with Geiger counters in hand, scanning meat hooks with a weary reluctance. Many of them broke down in tears during their shifts, not out of fear, but out of helplessness. They knew they were participating in something deeply wrong, but they also knew they had no other choice. By the end of 1987, the distribution system was overwhelmed. Some plants, like the Gomel meat combine in Belarus, were faced with a decision: destroy the shipments that exceeded radiation thresholds, or quietly send them elsewhere. They chose the latter. A train of 4 refrigerated cars was loaded with meat and quietly slipped away from the factory in the dead of night. At first, it was sent south, to Georgia. The authorities there refused it outright. Then it was rerouted to Moldova, Kazakhstan, the Baltic states. Each time, the answer was the same: no. But the story didn't end with those 4 train cars. They were only the visible tip of a much darker iceberg. Thousands of tons of contaminated food had already been consumed, and millions of people had already been exposed. Chernobyl didn't end in 1986. There are secrets still buried in the soil, in the blurred photographs, in the sealed train cars, and in the memories of those who witnessed it all. If something in this story made you pause, or if you've heard a tale like this before, feel free to share it in the comments below. I'm always here to read and to go deeper with you into the things that were never meant to be uncovered. And if you'd like to keep exploring the mysteries buried by time, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the journeys that lie ahead.